Yeah, cool. That's it.
So if you want to follow along, I'm going to drop this in the chat. So here's the sequence of what I'm going to go through. I'm first going to fairly quickly walk you through our platform and what we're doing. And then from there, I want to spend more time focusing on how you can integrate with your Synthflow agent with our platform. We have a free tier, so it's easy to get started. I just put into the chat also our blog post that really walks you through how to integrate with Make or with code. And that's what we're going to cover now. So without further ado, let me go back to our dashboard. I'm on our demo account now. And when you first log in, you see the summary page. The summary page will show you how many calls you've uploaded and the total duration of the calls you've uploaded and some high-level stats. Where things get interesting is when you scroll down and you click on one of the agents that you've uploaded, and then we can dig in and look at that agent. So I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm first going to talk about how we process the data. You send us, for each agent, you initially send us, excuse me, I should say it differently. When you connect a new agent to us, we take the first 15 calls that you send us, and we use those first 15 calls to figure out the stages of the call. What I mean by stages is an agent will typically go through stages like greeting, appointment scheduling, answering a question about a product, and then closing the call. We figure out what those stages are. And then once we have those stages, every time a new call comes in, then we can take each turn in the conversation and assign it to the stage. So when the user says hi, we can assign that to greeting. When the user says, I want to change my appointment, we can assign that to appointment scheduling. And what this enables us to do is to determine a path that each call goes down. That call path is helpful in and of itself, but it gets really helpful when you can take that call path and look at the call paths of all your calls for a given day or a week and really get the bigger picture of what your assistant is doing.
So you do all that automatically. You don't have to submit a call structure or anything. You can just get that from the calls.
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question. That's what I was about to say, is that we do it automatically because some people have so many agents, they don't want to go in there and edit each one. But also, if I were logged into my personal account right now, you would see a little edit button here. And you can edit the stages to better match what you think they should be.
Got it. Okay, makes sense.
We do the same thing with the call outcomes. So we use the first 15 calls and some LLM magic to figure out what the typical outcomes are of the call: appointment not scheduled, appointment scheduled, or product inquiry handled. Then we use those outcomes. LLMs are just like people in that they're more likely to be accurate if you break things down into small steps for them. They're more likely to be able to solve a problem when the problem is broken into small steps. So we take those outcomes, and then in another step, we ask the LLM, was this a successful call given the outcome or not a successful call? Again, you can edit the outcome names in our dashboard. You can't see that here, but if you log in, you can see that. Can you still see my screen, by the way? I just opened it.
We can. Carry on. We're good.
Just click on the sign up button here. You can sign up for free and you get, I forget how many free minutes do you get? You get 4 hours of calls per month for free. So you can click that sign up button. And once you sign up, you can click the upload calls button. We have a GUI for getting started. So you don't even have to integrate using Make or code initially. You can just download calls from Synthflow and drop them in here. And that'll bring you back to what I was showing you earlier, where you have they'll bring you back to our dashboard. So it's really easy to get started and try it out. You just go to, I'll drop this in the chat. You just go here and click sign up. And you can try it out and upload calls.
Nice.
Okay, so now that we've uploaded calls, I wanted to show you some of the things you get. So this is the thing that the voice AI developers' customers seem to like the most. It's this call flow map. And I think it just gives people reassurance that they can see, like, oh, the voice AI is doing what it's expecting. Like initially it greets the people, And then after greeting them, some amount of calls go to objective not met. Like, yeah, people sign out, people hang up. That's pretty normal. People hang up right away, but even that's something you can optimize as a voice AI developer and work on different tricks. Um, but then the calls are getting, from there partitioned. Some are going to appointment scheduling, some are going to product inquiry handling. If we go to appointment scheduling, we can see that some go straight from appointment scheduling to closing call. We can click on either a node and see all the calls that went through appointment scheduling, or an edge between the nodes. And that'll bring out a drawer where you can see the calls that went through this stage of greeting to appointment scheduling. And what I'm looking at here is a call where it started with greeting. You can see the stage and who was speaking. It was the assistant. It's a greeting. Then the user says, I'd like to schedule an appointment. That conversation turn was assigned to the appointment scheduling stage. And it just gives you an easy way to kind of look at your call volume and see like, oh, I see what's happening. Everything's going as expected, or something's not going as expected. This is going to be an easy way for me to click in and look in and see what's happening and see what I need to change. I'm going to pause there.
Yeah, that was really good. That was a really good walkthrough. So let's say if somebody's looking at this report and they see there's something which has gone off the happy path and they want to dig in, how would you kind of recommend someone like evaluate those calls? Just click in and read through the transcript and you can kind of tell where they've gone off path?
Yeah, actually for that, so this first screen is really something that's like for your quick view of understanding what the call's doing. If you want to figure out how to improve your call, I actually like the call map more. Maybe that's a bias because I'm a little, it was the first thing we built and I think it's neat. But with the call map, it's a similar thing where we're showing you the stages of the call. But what's different about the call map is we'll highlight in red where most of the calls are stopping with failure. It makes it easier to subset to just the calls that are going poorly. The other thing you can do with the call map, and in the demo account, it's not as good of an example, but you'll see something like most of your calls, like 106 calls here, 47 calls here, 17. This is the happy path that most calls are going down. But you might find like this weird branch, and it's when you click on the branches that go off in an unexpected direction that you find the insights. You'll click on those and it will, and if you click on the transcript part, it'll bring you to the part of the conversation where it's going off the rails. It'll highlight it in yellow and it'll give you ideas about what you need to improve about your assistant. We haven't, one of the things we want to do is like start using diffusion models to turn this into like a comic book panel, so it's quicker to read because reading transcripts is slow, but people can ingest that file stuff quicker. But we haven't built that yet.
Yeah, we have like the LLM as judge to just like evaluate. It's the call and summarizes it, but again, that's still like a bit of a pain to read all these summaries, especially if you're doing any sort of significant call volumes. This might be a bit of like a out there question, but presumably it might be possible, and I don't want to kind of guess features, etc. But you could almost kind of extrapolate something like this out to self-healing and self-recommendations through call improvements, and maybe if somebody ships like an incomplete assistant that maybe could use another couple of stages added onto it, you could probably even tell by having a decent bunch of calls running through your system.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're going with this. So I'm going to pop over back to my dashboard.
That wasn't a pre-scheduled comment, by the way.
Because I'm logged in.
If anyone's listening.
I can't show it, but we have a feature where you can integrate with Slack. And what we're doing with that Slack insights is we're showing you like, here's a call that went down a happy path. 90% of your calls that go through all these stages, the happy path, they complete and have a successful outcome. But here's a call that wasn't successful, but it went down the happy path. Look at it. And where we want to go from there is to then take those calls that should have been successful because we've figured out how to subset just to the calls that should have been that are problematic rather than like manually sampling. And we want to suggest improvements to people's system prompts to help them like, you know, figure out like, oh, well, these calls are going poorly because when the voice AI repeats their name back, spells their name back, it speaks way too fast. You got to like prompt it to speak slower. Things like that, that we think we want to get to the vision that you described, Tom, where we can help kind of build self-healing systems with a human in the loop.
Yeah, I'm wondering that you can really pull some really good insights out of this. And like I said, having the data served up this way, a visual for any decent sized company who has to report on the effectiveness of these things, that's going to be a really useful page to show them.
Yep. Yeah. So another thing I'd like to show is the custom metrics. So what a lot of people, because this is in line with what you were just talking about, Tom, you can ask custom metrics of calls. So the summary is great, but summaries, one-line summaries, LLM as a judge, they don't capture kind of what happens within a call often. It often glosses over. This is a common problem with voice AIs. It glosses over kind of the details that might happen in particular turns of a call. And one of the ways to approach that issue is to like look at call maps, and it'll help you identify the different stages that you need to focus on and subset rather than random sampling. Another thing you can do is you can define custom metrics. Like you may be interested in knowing your voice AI should be asking in the US for consent to record the call. And you might want to ask, like, did the assistant ask for consent to record the call? And we'll then, for every call that comes in, we'll ask that question and we'll surface. You can click on the times it's false, and we'll show you just the calls where that was false. And you can look in and be like, why did the voice AI not ask for consent? And you can see what the issue was and try to figure out how to improve it. So it's just one more way to improve your agent. And it's also something that like your customers might be interested in too, because they're like, well, how can I get my voice AI assistant to sell better? You know, how did it handle this objection? Did the voice AI handle the objection or something like that?
Yeah, nice. There's a couple of like interesting quirks sometimes come up in assistant calls. One of them is sudden bigger latency gaps in between questions. So let's say if you have a script and everything's going really nicely, but then suddenly for some reason a question comes up, the user responds as normal, but then there's a big lag, and then the user has to repeat themselves, and then maybe the assistant repeats themselves, and then it kind of gets through. Is there a way to identify something like that in your system?
Yeah, so this is like, it's almost, when I see this happen the most is around interruptions, where like the person, the voice AI will think the person has finished talking and it'll start talking, and then the person will like wait for them, and it just like the question ends up getting repeated and things get confusing. Is that when the type of scenario you're talking about, or maybe did I miss what you mean?
Sometimes it can be like a rogue background sound which cuts the response out, but there is now and again, I don't know if this happens when you're just maybe listening to voice AI calls all day, so you're more attuned to it, and then the normal person won't notice. But sometimes you do find that now and again there comes like a little bug where there's like a 9 out of the 10 questions that the assistant will use on the call will be absolutely perfect, like normal latency expected, but then one of them, for some random reason, just has like a double or triple the length of gap. And it'd be good. This is maybe like a more minor, like fine-tuning use case rather than a high-level general one, but it would be good to be able to identify those. And I see it when I'm doing recordings, for instance, and doing videos, like because I'm looking at the audio waves between the responses, so I can see the latency gap on each response. And sometimes most of the time they're even, but then you can see one which is like double the length of the other one.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. So we calculate on the back end, we're calculating the latency that for the human response and the latency for the AI response. And we're calculating how much of the time the person is silent when it's their turn to speak, which is indicative of confusion, and all these other audio metrics. We haven't surfaced them yet. We just have when you log in, this is something where shipping, hopefully today, is something where you can just download all those metrics for your call so you can see the latency for all your calls. But eventually we want to surface that and put it in what we call a rain cloud plot, where right now this is the call duration distribution, and you can see like most of the calls, this is a frequency histogram. It's a frequency distribution. You can see most of the calls are around here, around 30 seconds. And then the individual calls are these dots underneath. And we want to create a drop down here for latency. So you'd be able to see like, oh, most of my calls have pretty low latency, but you could click on the ones with higher latency and see what was going on with those and see when they happen. Are they happening because of interruptions, or is there some way you might be able to improve the flow so that those latencies are less likely to happen? Or like there's a long latency and maybe you want to go tell your client like, hey, this thing happened. But we're working on it. It sometimes happens. It's okay. Most of the time your latencies are over here. There's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, sometimes it can be random things like response length or sentence length, or if they're doing some sort of RAG over a knowledge base, which has like an awkward setup, then there's just like a bump in latency there too. Or if they're making like if they're using a custom action, which is like a laggy API, and they don't get the response back in time. Yeah, having that flagged would be absolutely awesome, especially at scale. That'd be killer.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said speaks to the craftsmanship of building voice AI. Is like you can, I think, you can get something up and running in 5 minutes, and that will get you 80% of the way. But the next 15% is going to take you a lot longer and a lot of skill. And it's faster to get there if you have a lot of skill, but it takes really understanding how these systems work and how to like avoid these latency traps and other problems that can come up if you're not designing your system well and carefully monitoring and analyzing it.
100%. If anybody's kind of new to Synthflow, we can just cover what we're talking about a bit more. Is if you're using something like custom actions, or if you have your assistant connected to a knowledge base, if a user asks a question which isn't in the prompt, then it can go and look up through a document or a series of documents or a PDF, and then bring that information back into the call, which may take slightly longer than a predetermined script. Or another one which you can do in Synthflow is something called a custom action, which is basically just like an API call, which you can either trigger to happen before the call happens. So actually, an example I like to use is if you want to get the weather. So if you're doing anything with like an outside venue, for instance, you might want to know the weather to determine what you recommend to the end customer, or if it's like a car service or like a concert or whatever it is. Then you can bring that weather forecast into the conversation. You could probably do that before the call starts, and you avoid the mid-call conversation. But if you're the mid-call latency, the one way to cover that, if you're doing it mid-call, this could be something like looking up an order ID in a Shopify store to track where the shipment is. For instance, that could be the customer gives the ID. You can look up the database to see the status of the package. And to cover that API call going through to Shopify, you will set in your prompt or in your field in Synthflow, you can trigger the agent to say, okay, I'm just going to look up your information now. And while the assistant is saying that sentence, is making the API call at the same time. So that then covers that lookup. Hopefully that makes sense.
That was a great intro to knowledge bases and RAG and tool calling. All right there. Very succinctly.
Thanks. I'm not the most advanced custom action developer. We've got a few killers in Synthflow who does some amazing stuff, but that's as simple as I can understand it anyway.